The rooftop cafe was almost deserted, with only a few hushed conversations whispering in the background. Below us, a vast expanse of city lights twinkled like stars on a warm summer evening. Sitting across the table from my husband, I noticed how his fingers absent-mindedly toyed with the rim of his coffee cup. He appeared weary and distant, almost like a stranger to me, despite all the years we had shared. As I took a sip of my wine, letting it linger on my tongue, I hoped the peaceful ambience might awaken something between us. Then unexpectedly he leaned over and kissed me. It was a gentle, lingering kiss that felt both familiar and unsettling. There was something different about it, a searching quality that almost felt like a farewell. When he pulled away, his gaze remained on mine, as if he anticipated something genuine from me. I wanted to inquire about his feelings, but just as I opened my mouth to speak, his phone buzzed on the table, shattering the moment. He glanced at the screen, the light casting shadows on his face, then muttered an apology before getting up and disappearing around the corner to take the call. Left alone, I stared at the empty chair across from me, the cool evening breeze brushing against my skin. The kiss replayed in my mind, its brief intensity leaving me with an unsettling emptiness. How did we end up here? When did we start drifting apart? I shut my eyes, feeling the weight of the silence bearing down on me. It was as if a warning was sounding, a small fissure appearing in the surface of our shared life. Yet, a curious thought began to take shape in my mind, one I never imagined I would ponder as we drove home in silence that night. I couldn't shake the idea. Perhaps we just needed something new, a spark to jolt us out of our quiet, fading routine. It wasn't that I was dissatisfied with him, not entirely. Instead, it felt like restlessness, a curiosity about what else might exist between us or even beyond it. I had witnessed friends and couples reignite their relationships in surprising ways, and while I once believed that wasn't for me that night, I began to wonder if it could be. Days passed with me remaining quiet, turning the thought over in my mind, feeling it grow heavier every time I looked at him. Could we truly handle this? Would he even consider it? And if I brought it up, would it change how he perceived me forever? The idea wouldn't leave me, it gripped me. A whisper of the unfamiliar that might either bring us closer together, or push us even further apart. One evening as we sat in our softly lit kitchen, those same thoughts spun through my head. I finally broke the silence, observing him as he read, lost in the newspaper, hardly aware of my presence. It felt like we inhabited two separate worlds, divided by an invisible barrier. My heart raced, each beat a frantic reminder that I couldn't hold back any longer. "Can I ask you something?" I said, trying to keep my tone light while feeling the weight of my words. He looked up, slightly taken aback, folding the paper in his lap as he scrutinized my face. I hesitated, the words stuck at the tip of my tongue, still terrifyingly out of reach. The wine we had been sipping all evening seemed to bolster my courage, pushing me just far enough to say, "What would you think if we tried something new?" He blinked, a hint of a frown forming on his forehead as he attempted to decipher my intent. I swallowed hard, willing myself to continue. "What if?" My voice trailed off, heart pounding. I almost let it slip away, nearly buried the thought. But something deep inside me refused to back down. What if we invited someone else into our lives just to shake things up a bit? The silence that followed crackled with electricity, hovering between us like a storm cloud on the verge of bursting. He didn't respond right away. His gaze was steady and unblinking. I could almost see the gears turning in his mind, working to process my words. Was he angry? Shocked? Perhaps a mix of both. At last, he cleared his throat, his voice low and cautious. "Are you serious? Or is this some kind of joke?" I let out a nervous laugh, one that felt hollow even to me. I hadn't intended to be so blunt, nor to sound so casual about something that had consumed my thoughts for days. "No, I'm serious," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's just, our relationship is great, but maybe it could be more." He continued to stare, his gaze intense, as if I were a puzzle he no longer knew how to solve. Setting the newspaper aside, he sat up straighter, glancing away for a moment before looking back at me. I could see him deliberating, choosing his next words with care. "Who do you have in mind?" he finally asked, his voice steady yet tinged with a hint of something I couldn't quite interpret. Maybe curiosity, perhaps caution. This was the moment of truth. Taking a deep breath, I felt my heart racing against my ribcage as I spoke the name that had been lingering in my mind. I was thinking maybe her. He raised an eyebrow, surprise evident in his eyes. His voice mixed disbelief with a flicker of intrigue he tried to conceal. I nodded, unable to find the words to elaborate. My thoughts raced ahead, envisioning the possibilities, the risks, and the uncharted territory we were about to explore. For a fleeting moment, exhilaration coursed through me. A thrilling danger that quickened my heartbeat and made me wonder if this was what we had been missing all along. The silence stretched, each second heavy with unasked questions. Finally, he looked away, his gaze drifting to the darkened window beside us, where our reflections lingered like ghosts. A few days later I met her, the friend I had been contemplating since that peculiar conversation with him. We hadn't picked a specific location, so I suggested a familiar spot, an old, nearly forgotten parking lot behind an art house cinema. We used to hang out there as students, sneaking in cheap wine and laughter into the late hours. The atmosphere brimmed with nostalgia and possibilities, making it feel like the perfect place to broach my idea. A setting where new experiences once blossomed without fear of consequences. The warm air carried a hint of dust and the scent of distant rain. She leaned casually against the car, appearing relaxed and composed, as if we were simply catching up as usual. Yet my pulse raced as I struggled to articulate my thoughts. Could I really say it out loud? The very notion tightened my throat, but I steeled myself to move forward. I knew that once I shared my idea with her, there would be no turning back. So I attempted to sound nonchalant, even as my voice betrayed my anxiety. I have something to share, but it might sound a bit odd. She turned to me, curiosity dancing in her eyes, a slight smile tugging at her lips. Odd? She repeated, raising an eyebrow. Now I'm intrigued. What's going on? I took a deep breath, glancing around as if someone might overhear us, even though the place was deserted. All that surrounded us were empty concrete expanses, rusty fences, and a silence that magnified my every word. I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, I said, carefully choosing my words. Well, not just us but also him. Feels like something is missing. Maybe it's just me. But I thought you might be able to help. Her smile broadened, though I caught a glimmer of surprise in her eyes. She stayed quiet, waiting for me to elaborate, which only heightened my anxiety. It was as if she sensed what I was about to propose but wanted me to articulate the strange, unspoken idea. I think it might be intriguing if we invited you into our lives just to shake things up a bit, I said, my voice barely steady. The words rushed out, as if saying them quickly could lessen their weight. Her expression was inscrutable as she leaned back, arms folded, contemplating what I just shared with an intensity one hadn't expected. Part of me anticipated her laughter, perhaps even her declaring me crazy. Instead, she tilted her head, a curious spark lighting her eyes. You're serious? I nodded, feeling a blend of relief and trepidation. Her reaction mattered deeply, and I couldn't predict what would follow. Well, she began, a hint of a smirk on her lips. I suppose it could be interesting. I mean, we've always been close, right? And you've supported me through a lot. But are you sure you're not just testing me? Her words lingered, and I realized she was trying to gauge my intentions just as I was trying to understand hers. I shook my head, letting out a nervous laugh to ease the tension. No, it's not a test. I'm serious. I believe it could be beneficial for us. Maybe I'm crazy, but it feels right. I wouldn't have brought it up if I didn't mean it. She took a deep breath, her gaze dropping as if weighing the options in her mind. Finally, she looked back at me, her expression steady and filled with something I couldn't quite identify. Okay, she replied simply, as if the choice had been effortless, as if she had anticipated this moment. The straightforwardness of her response left me momentarily speechless. My heart raced, a mix of excitement and fear swelling within me. I hadn't expected her to be so open, so ready to consider my proposal. Her acceptance provided relief but also made everything feel alarmingly real. There was no turning back now. Just promise me one thing, she added, her tone softer and more serious. Promise that if any of us starts to feel uncomfortable, we'll stop. No questions asked. I nodded, the significance of her words sinking in. Of course, I wouldn't want to do anything that could harm us. This is supposed to be a positive experience, Something that brings us closer. She nodded in agreement, a small, almost mischievous smile returning to her face. It was the kind of grin that made me feel as though we were about to embark on a grand adventure, reminiscent of our college days when the world was brimming with daring possibilities. Yet, despite my excitement, an unsettling feeling nagged at the back of my mind. A quiet voice warning me that this might lead to something beyond our control. She checked her watch, gave me a quick nod, and slipped into her car. "All right then," she said, her tone light but her eyes serious. "Let's see where this takes us." As her car pulled out of the parking lot, I stood there for a moment, watching her taillights fade down the street, a shiver racing down my spine. This idea, once just a passing thought, had now morphed into something alive. The day after our conversation, I couldn't shake my anticipation. The words we exchanged echoed in my mind, stirring up a mix of excitement and dread. I wasn't certain I was ready to follow through with our plan, but deep down, I recognized there was no way back now. This idea had taken root, and it felt as if my entire life was gradually revolving around it, shifting into place like puzzle pieces I hadn't realized were missing. That evening, as I cooked dinner with my husband, the kitchen filled with the delightful aromas of simmering spices and fresh herbs, an idea struck me, something lighthearted to ease us into the change. I glanced over my shoulder at him, feeling my pulse quicken as I prepared to speak. "I was thinking," I said, trying to keep my tone casual, "maybe we should invite her over one evening, just to hang out like we used to." He looked at me with curiosity, pausing as he stirred the sauce on the stove. "Just to hang out?" he echoed, as if trying to gauge the underlying meaning of my suggestion. "Yes," I replied, laughing lightly to mask my nerves. In fact, I thought it might be fun to have a cooking competition, a culinary showdown between her and me. I aimed for a light-hearted tone, hoping it would disguise the true reason behind my invitation. "You could be the judge and taste test our dishes to determine who wins." He raised an eyebrow, a slight smile teasing the corners of his mouth. "So I just get to sit back, eat, and decide who's the better chef?" I grinned, relieved that he found the idea amusing. "Exactly. You'll be the ultimate taste judge. It'll be fun, don't you think?" "It'll be like a friendly competition," I suggested. He paused for a moment, eyeing me as if trying to decipher my true intentions, but eventually, he nodded with a chuckle. "All right, I'm in. Just tell me when the big event is scheduled." I sighed in relief, feeling the tension dissipate as a wave of anticipation surged through me. Everything was coming together, and with each passing moment, it felt increasingly tangible. A few nights later, she arrived at our home, her arms loaded with bags of ingredients, and a playful grin on her face. I welcomed her into the kitchen, where we quickly set up our cooking stations. She seemed completely relaxed, giggling as she unpacked vibrant vegetables, spices, and fragrant herbs. I found myself matching her enthusiasm, working to push aside the nervous excitement churning in my stomach. "Tonight is just a casual get-together," I reminded myself. "Nothing more." "All right, chef," I said, attempting to keep my voice steady as I met her gaze. "Are you ready for a challenge?" She shot me a smirk, glancing over at my husband, who was already seated at the counter, watching us with a bemused expression. "Oh, I'm ready," she replied, her tone playful. "But are you?" We burst into laughter, and the competition commenced. The kitchen filled with the sounds of knives chopping against cutting boards, vegetables sizzling in hot pans, and the intoxicating aromas of garlic, basil, and rosemary. She moved swiftly and with confidence, as if she had been preparing for this moment all week. I concentrated on my dish, pouring all my effort into each step while feeling the weight of his gaze following my every move. Every so often, he chimed in with light-hearted banter, teasing us both while keeping his tone encouraging. "Come on. I thought this was a competition," he laughed. "Don't hold back. Show me what you two can really do." It was unusual to see him observing us with such intensity, and it sent a thrill coursing through me that I struggled to understand. Perhaps it was the excitement of having her there, the novelty of the situation, or simply the way his eyes darted between us, as if he were witnessing something extraordinary. After about an hour, our dishes were finally ready. We plated them carefully, positioning them side by side on the counter. She had crafted a delectable pasta dish with roasted vegetables, bursting with color and rich aromas, while I had prepared a simple yet elegant risotto, creamy and fragrant with notes of lemon and thyme. "All right, Judge," she said, a playful sparkle in her eye as she gestured toward the plates. "It's time for the moment of truth." He regarded us both, feigning seriousness as he took his first bite of her dish. I watched intently as he savored it, nodding appreciatively. Then, he moved on to my creation, sampling it with a similar measured pace, his expression unreadable. The room fell silent, tension thick in the air as we awaited his verdict. My heart raced, each beat echoing loudly in my ears. Finally, he set his fork down and looked between us, a small smile forming on his lips. "You both did a fantastic job," he said, leaning back and crossing his arms. "I'm not sure I can pick a clear winner here." She laughed and nudged him playfully. "Oh, come on, no diplomatic answers. Who wins?" He shrugged, glancing between us with a bemused expression. "Honestly, it's impossible to choose. Each of you brought something unique to the table, and I think—" His pause hung in the air, unexpectedly heavy. "I think it all came together perfectly." His words lingered, resonating with a weight I hadn't anticipated. Such a simple comment, yet it felt laden with hidden meaning, subtly acknowledging the complex dynamic that had begun to unfold between us. My heart raced, leaving me with a strange mix of triumph and uncertainty for the rest of the night. We fell into an easy rhythm, sharing stories and laughter over glasses of wine. The atmosphere buzzed with warmth, charged with unspoken tension and a thrill that none of us were ready to confront. Each glance and laugh seemed to carry an underlying layer, a suggestion of something just out of reach. By the time she finally left, I felt a curious blend of exhilaration and apprehension, as if we had crossed an invisible boundary and were teetering on the brink of something new and unknown. As we cleaned up the kitchen, I caught his gaze and we exchanged a small smile, wordless yet brimming with anticipation. The evening had been a triumph, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we had only just begun to explore the depths of what this all meant. The following weeks flew by in an exhilarating blur. Our evenings together grew more frequent, nearly becoming a routine. Before long, she felt like a permanent part of our lives, a source of laughter and the lightheartedness that had been missing for so long. She blended seamlessly into our daily lives, her vibrant energy offsetting the subtle tension that lingered between my husband and me. But as much as I cherished her presence, an uneasy feeling began to stir within me. I caught glimpses of him watching her with an undeniable fascination, his gaze lingering in a way that suggested he was unaware of how it affected me. Despite being the one to initiate this arrangement, witnessing his interest in her made something tighten in my chest, as if I was gradually losing my place. One evening while she and I were mixing drinks in the kitchen, I couldn't contain my thoughts any longer. As she stirred a pitcher of sangria, giggling over a shared memory, I turned to her, striving for a casual tone. "Do you think this is all moving a bit too quickly?" I asked, managing a hesitant smile. She paused, looking at me with a trace of surprise. "You're asking me that?" She chuckled, though a cautious glint lingered in her gaze. "You're the one who set all this in motion, remember?" Her words made me laugh, yet they struck a nerve inside me. She was right, of course. This was all my doing. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being left behind in a situation I had created. That evening as we all gathered, a subtle shift in the atmosphere caught my attention. My husband was unusually silent, lost in thought, and it felt almost as if he were a million miles away. We had been discussing trivial topics, places we wanted to visit and amusing memories from past vacations, but when she stepped away to take a call in the other room, I sensed his mind drifting elsewhere. Taking advantage of the moment, I looked at him, trying to keep my tone even. "You've been quiet tonight. Is something on your mind?" He seemed surprised, almost as if he hadn't realized I was paying attention. "No, not really. Just thinking," he replied, a vague response that didn't satisfy my curiosity. "Thinking." I pressed, my heart racing. I wanted to dig deeper, to understand what was troubling him, but something held me back. Instead, I attempted to keep the mood light, even as I felt my nerves unraveling. "If there's something bothering you, you can talk to me, you know?" He hesitated, glancing towards the room where she had gone. Infine. It's just new. That's all. His words stung more than I anticipated, and I forced a smile, nodding as though I understood completely. Yet, beneath the surface, I knew we were entering uncharted waters. Each of us was ensnared in delicate, invisible threads that seemed to connect us while also pulling us apart. A moment later she returned, her laughter slicing through the tension like a refreshing breeze. We continued the evening as if nothing was amiss, but the weight of unspoken words lingered, casting a shadow over the night as we exchanged goodbyes. Once I was alone in the kitchen, I stared at the empty wine glasses on the counter. I replayed the evening in my mind, trying to pinpoint the moment things had begun to shift, morphing into something beyond my control. The silence enveloped me, heavy and almost suffocating. The next evening started on a different note. He appeared even more distant, and she, sensing the shift, filled the void with cheerful anecdotes and playful jokes. I smiled along, striving to maintain a light-hearted atmosphere, but I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface, like a thread slowly unraveling. After dinner, he stepped outside to take a call, leaving her and me alone in the living room. She turned to me, her expression softening as she recognized the concern I could no longer mask. "Is everything okay?" she asked, her voice quieter than usual. I hesitated, feeling the weight of my emotions pressing down on me. How could I explain this? "I think he's having a hard time with all of this," I admitted, trying to steady my voice. "Maybe I am too." She regarded me carefully, her gaze thoughtful. "You know you can pull back whenever you want," she said gently, though her tone hinted at something deeper, an almost hesitant note. "I don't want to be the reason for your discomfort." Her words resonated within me, leading me to question whether I was losing grip on the situation I had initiated. I offered her a small, appreciative smile, but a sense of urgency gripped me. It felt too late to turn back. This concept, this dynamic that had emerged among us, had woven itself into our lives. Just as I was about to respond, he re-entered the room, his face unreadable. He sat beside me, but his expression suggested he was still miles away, ensnared in thoughts I couldn't access. A mix of frustration and sadness welled up within me, but I forced myself to remain silent, hoping he would eventually share what was on his mind. Instead, the conversation drifted into small talk, filling the void between us while my insecurities festered. She kept talking, trying to lighten the mood, but I could sense that even she felt the widening gap between us. It was subtle, a barely detectable shift in our dynamics, but it was palpable, an unspoken tension none of us dared to confront. After she left, he sat in silence, his eyes fixed on the floor. I waited, hoping he would break the silence, but the weight of the quiet became uncomfortable. Finally, I couldn't hold back any longer. "What's going on?" I asked softly, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are you happy with this?" He looked at me, his expression difficult to interpret. "I don't know," he replied quietly. "It's just not what I expected." A surge of fear coursed through me, but I fought to keep calm. "Do you want to end this?" I asked, bracing myself for his response. He shook his head slowly, almost as if trying to convince himself. "No, I don't think so. I just need some time to figure out what all of this really means." I nodded, swallowing down the rush of emotions that threatened to surface. His words left me feeling more uncertain than ever, as if the ground beneath us was gradually eroding away. Yet, I couldn't bring myself to halt the journey we had embarked upon. We spent the remainder of the night wrapped in an unsettling silence, both of us lost in our thoughts. It felt as if I were observing our lives from a distance, powerless to intervene or alter our course. The boundaries between us had blurred, leaving me uncertain of where I truly stood. The next morning, he left for work without saying a word, his expression distant as he kissed me goodbye. I watched him walk away, the weight of our unresolved tension settling over me like a thick fog. I longed to talk to him, to uncover his true feelings, but I was too fearful of what his response might reveal. The day dragged on, filled with silence and uncertainty. I went through the motions, attempting to keep myself busy, yet my thoughts kept drifting back to him, to us, and to the fragile balance we were struggling to uphold. When he returned that evening, the chasm between us felt even wider. Our conversation was minimal, reduced to short exchanges that only deepened my sense of isolation. I could feel the walls closing in, the burden of my choices pressing heavily upon me. As I lay awake that night, staring into the darkness, a persistent feeling gnawed at me, that we were teetering on the brink of something irreversible, just a step away from losing ourselves in each other for good. As the days passed, we sank deeper into a strange limbo, neither advancing nor letting go. The silences stretched longer, our conversations grew stilted, and the warmth we once shared faded into a distant memory. She still visited occasionally, her presence a mix of comfort and a stark reminder of the growing divide between us. One evening after she had left, I found him sitting alone in the dimly lit living room, his gaze vacant. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken words, and I knew that if I didn't speak up now, the opportunity might slip away forever. "Is this what you want?" I asked softly, breaking the stillness. My voice trembled, but I steeled myself to meet his eyes, searching for any sign that he still felt connected to me. He looked up, startled, as though he hadn't expected me to confront him. For a brief moment his expression softened, revealing a glimpse of the man I had known for so long. But then he looked away, his silence answering the unasked question. Panic surged within me, a sinking realization that everything I had feared might already be coming to pass. My hands shook as I clenched them together, hoping he would speak, anything to reassure me and bring us back to one another. But he remained silent, his gaze fixed on the shadows dancing across the walls. "I thought this would bring us closer," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could catch them. "But now I don't know where we stand." He looked at me then, his expression unreadable, and for the first time, I wondered if he felt the same fear and sadness that had consumed me. We sat there like two strangers, bound by memories but separated by choices neither of us could undo. Finally he spoke, his voice barely above a murmur. "I think we've lost ourselves somewhere along the way." His words hung in the air, heavy with finality. A hollow ache settled in my chest, but I nodded, acknowledging the truth in his statement. We had tried to rewrite our story, to reignite something that perhaps had never truly been lost. In doing so, we had drifted so far apart that finding our way back seemed an impossible task. That night, as I lay alone in bed, I felt the emptiness envelop me, cold and unyielding. We hadn't said goodbye, nor had we made any decisions, but deep down, I knew a chapter had come to an end. In that silence I realized an uncomfortable truth. Sometimes in our efforts to keep something alive, we only expose its fragility.